My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. Is there an intersection between the creative process and spiritual awakening? Will this crossroad allow seekers to turn fresh eyes upon their lives and meet their circumstances with the openness, curiosity, and the resourcefulness of an artist? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Marisa Handler, calls this awakening the beautiful unfolding. Marisa Handler is a writer, singer-songwriter, coach, teacher, and the author of the memoir Loyal to the Sky, which won a Nautilus Gold Award for world-changing books. Her essays, fiction, and poetry have appeared in numerous publications. Her music is available on Spotify and SoundCloud, and her videos on YouTube. On the spiritual side, she's been practicing insight meditation in retreats and daily life since 2002 and teaching since 2012. She's also a certified facilitator of the work of Byron Katie, a powerful practice for questioning painful beliefs and accessing intrinsic wisdom. Her website is marisahandler.com, and she joins me this week to share her path and program, Live Your Creative Genius. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Marisa Handler. Welcome, Marisa.
Thank you, Victor.
Please share with us your early path and how it unfolded into your calling.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I grew up until the age of almost 12 in South Africa, in apartheid South Africa. And so that was a rigidly stratified society. And I think as a young child trying to make sense of the world, I was also quite a sensitive and quite a spiritual child in such a culture and in a close family with a Black maid who I was very close to, trying to understand this worldview, which was profoundly segregated. And it didn't make a lot of sense, really. So I think on some level, I started wrestling at quite an early age with, wait, what's wrong here? You know, having some deep sense of beauty and kind of the internal goodness of life and how that wasn't necessarily playing out with what I saw around me. So kind of these mixed messages. And then, you know, that played out, I think, until we left apartheid South Africa and moved to the US. But I think it set a blueprint for trying to understand the world, basically, trying to make sense of a world which didn't make much sense and bring it into some kind of alignment with what felt like my deeper values.
Tell us a little bit about your spirituality as a child.
Well, I was raised Jewish and we were observant, and I had a very strong sense of connection with God. And so I would pray quite fervently as a child. So that was the route primarily that it took. But also I remember senses of the sublime or almost the transcendent, looking at something very beautiful, like a sunset as a child, having a sense of being lifted almost out of myself and just really of a kind of ecstasy. So that was mostly how it manifested, was through a sense of almost like a private connection with God and being deeply moved by beauty in the world.
And how did your creativity manifest as a child?
I in lots of ways, and my parents were very encouraging of it, which I'm grateful for. I wrote stories, I wrote plays, and then directed my peers. I illustrated the things that I wrote. I was very into visual art, actually, primarily as a child, which is interesting because I didn't end up going in that direction much at all. But a lot of my creativity came through with drawing. And my mother used to say that I would happily play. They could leave me and I would happily play on my own for hours. It wasn't hard for me to keep myself occupied. Yeah.
What advice would you offer parents of children who express sensitivity and creativity?
I would say just to really to do the best that you can to help your child cultivate those and explore those without a sense of pressure. We live in a kind of an interesting culture now where on some level creativity and the arts are fetishized, but in other ways they're seen as kind of just not real or not realistic. So I think what often happens is children's creativity gets encouraged at a certain age, and then it's like, okay, time to put away the playthings and get serious about life. And I would say just to really nurture a child's sense of what they themselves are drawn to intuitively and of play. I think the more we get to play, the more we have room. I think play is a child's form of art. Basically, it's a child's form of creativity. And there's a quote from, I think it's Ursula Le Guin, who said, "Yeah, the artist is the child who survived."
Mm.
I love that quote because it really speaks to how it's in all of us. It really is in all of us, and it requires, I think, some sensitive parenting to let that continue to grow in us. And then at some point, either, we decide or society decides for us, or our parents decide for us that it's not appropriate anymore. And I think as much as possible to let that child not just survive, but thrive throughout our lives, teenagers, and then as, when we ourselves come into responsibility for ourselves as adults.
Absolutely. I've shared this before. There's a quote from the Moody Blues. They wrote a song called The Eyes of a Child, and it says, "With the eyes of a child, you must come out and see that your world's spinning round, and through life you will be a small part of a whole of a love that exists. With the eyes of a child, you will see."
Yes. Yeah.
We have to keep those children's eyes in us open.
Absolutely.
What was the inspiration for your Nautilus award-winning memoir, Loyal to the Sky, and what did you share with your readers?
So in my 20s, I did a lot of activism, social justice and environmental justice activism. And I was also writing about these things. I was freelancing as a journalist. I wanted to amplify voices that were not getting heard. And so I'd been kind of writing and sharing my experiences in smaller ways. And I got to the point where a lot of what I'd been doing was in the global justice movement. So we were organizing for different ways of, of structuring community and life and life and all its attendant gifts, the planet not being dependent on the market really for its survival, I suppose we do, and rather coming essentially into wiser ways of being and interacting. And I started writing a book that was subtitled A Spiritual Analysis of Corporate Globalization. So it was actually looking at what's the consciousness underlying the systems we've created that are destroying the planet and thus ultimately ourselves. It seems pretty obvious this is not a healthy way to go. Why do we do this? And I wrote about 400 pages of a book that was looking at spiritual texts, looking at economics, looking at philosophy. And I took that to Johanna von Delling, who became my editor at Barrett Kohler Publishers, and said, "Hey, this is what I'm writing. Are you interested?" And she looked at my portfolio and she said, "I think the message you're trying to put out about a deeper way, a much more conscious way of being, of living, of interacting, of running an economy, etc., would be better put through narrative, through your own stories." And I was quite resistant to the idea for a while, but then I tried it and turned out she was right. Once I started writing creatively, which that project was, it really just had a life of its own. And, at the time I was 28 years old. I wasn't famous. She said, "Write a memoir." I said, "Me? Why?" but that's actually the way that it ended up going, and it was a very rewarding book to write, and then also to see out in the world and how it was reaching people. Yeah.
You earned a master's in fine art from the Iowa Writers Workshop and received many fellowships in creative writing, including a Fulbright and an Elizabeth George Foundation grant. With all of this achievement, you experienced what you refer to as the dark night of the soul. Please share with us what happened and how you emerged from this.
Yeah. So after Loyal to the Sky came out, I applied for MFA programs in fiction and was accepted to Iowa. And so I was there for 2 years. And while it was a tremendously enriching time on the level of just devoting myself to the craft of writing, which I'd never really done, and really learning the craft and learning how to write story, um, how to write literary fiction, it was also psychologically, I think, challenging for me for a number of reasons. And I came out of that and got this Fulbright to go to India to work on my novel in Varanasi, which is a very intense place to be. And I think I entered that experience in a psychologically fragile state, basically. And I'd had anxiety. I'd always had anxiety, although I don't actually know that I knew I'd had anxiety, but it started becoming very clear once I was there, and the anxiety grew and grew, and at some point I stopped sleeping and just was kind of stuck in terror. And so ultimately I ended up leaving India and returning to the US to navigate my way through a breakdown, ultimately breakthrough, but at the time breakdown. And I call these experiences dark nights of the soul because they really challenge us. I teach on the theme of the dark night of the soul because I believe very passionately that these kinds of experiences where we really lose ourselves as we knew ourselves to be have great potential for our own unfolding spiritually. And that said, at the time, it was tremendously humbling. I had a lot of shame come up. I'd been quite a high achiever, and all of a sudden I found it challenging to go to the grocery store. I didn't feel, I wasn't capable really of working. I wasn't sure how I was going to pay rent the next month. It was tremendously confusing and I think painful for my friends and family. And there I was, just stuck. And this person that I'd known myself to be, highly creative, confident, and clear, kind of solo traveling, backpacking through the world, going to the Amazon to write about communities resisting oil exploitation, et cetera, et cetera. Leaving the house was challenging. So it was an intense passage. I would say it's an initiation. And I imagine some of your listeners have had experiences like this and can probably identify.
And how did you emerge from this?
It took time. It took years, really. And a tremendous amount of inner work and other supports. There were medications at times that were very supportive. I had a good therapist. I had a mentor. I reached out for other. At that point, I'd been in the Dharma. I'd been sitting meditation for a long time. Gosh, I mean, I started at least a decade. I think 10 or 15 years. So that was my primary practice, and I realized that wasn't going to cut it. I needed to go deeper. Basically, I was navigating some old trauma that was coming up, which is very often at the roots of these experiences. And I needed a whole range of tools and support to get me through. Miraculously, I found these. I've come to believe, even with very little resources, and I've really come to believe that when we do the work that is ours to do, whether this is internal or, we're in a community where there's a community that's facing a problem, we see what is ours to do, internal or external, that we are supported in it. And that was my experience. But it did take a long time, and it was bit by bit, baby steps, really, coming out. Oh, here I am driving a car. Here I am, going to the grocery store. Here I am working for a couple of hours and getting paid. It was like that kind of one small step at a time. And I had such shame around it. The shame was as crippling, I would say, on some level, almost as the experience itself. And because of that, I thought, what would it have been like to go through an experience like that, which ultimately opened me in such deep ways, in ways that I never would have been opened without it. I'm a hell of a lot of a bigger person, I think, for that experiences and subsequent ones, because that wasn't for better or worse, that wasn't the last one. What would it have been like to go through an experience like that without carrying such shame? And then I realized, I really actually need to kind of come out of the closet and start writing and speaking about, like, just talking about this. And the things that were most helpful during that experience were when I was reading thinkers or writers or listening to teachers who framed it in a spiritual way. So starting with St. John of the Cross, where the term comes from, the dark night of the soul. And then some contemporary teachers and, people who have spoken about on the spiritual journey, this is going to happen at some point. It's not to everyone, but the sense of being completely severed from what we knew, almost like taken apart, much the way a caterpillar in a chrysalis, it turns into complete mush before these imaginal cells, I love that name, they begin to sprout, and it takes form as a butterfly. That many of us have this kind of experience. And what if we were able to hold it as that, as an initiation into our next level of being?
As a gift.
Yes.
Absolutely.
A hard gift, as Adyashanti talks about fierce grace. And I love that, because it is grace, but it's ferocious. At any point, I would have chosen anything else.
You're a practitioner and teacher of insight meditation. What is insight meditation, and what are the gifts of this practice?
Yeah, so it is also known as Vipassana meditation. Vipassana meditation, and the tradition I practice in, its the lineage really is Thai forest, Thailand and Burma, and it was brought to the West by Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield and Sharon Salzberg. And so much of my own practice history has been through Spirit Rock in Marin County in Northern California, and also some at the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. At its most basic, it's breath-based meditation and quieting the mind and coming into the deeper layers of our being and letting that unfold.
You are also a certified facilitator of the work of Byron Katie. Please tell us about the work and how it enhanced your life.
The work of Byron Katie is this deceptively simple practice that is laser focused at getting right to the points in us of pain and suffering, really. And just as I was speaking about with the dark night, when we really go into these places with good tools, they have the potential to expand us tremendously. And the work of Byron Katie is an amazing tool. I haven't come across something else like it that's quite as simple and profound in terms of dismantling the kinds of beliefs that we hold that cause us suffering and keep us stuck in certain patterns. So it's really been a joy to come into this practice. It's been very liberating for me, and I've seen how transformative it can be for my clients. Yeah.
Please tell us about your music, your songwriting and singing, and how this form of expression blessed your life.
Yeah. So I've been singing since college, when a couple of friends heard me sing and said, "Hey, you sound good," and then I picked up the guitar, and yeah, it's a big part of me, and there's many ways that I can express myself through writing. I write poetry, I write fiction and essays, and then there are ways that song can capture things on a level that's quite visceral, really comes from deep in the body, And of course, melody carries emotion. So there are, at least for me, there are ways I can access certain things through song that writing, there's a different filter that's happening there. And as much as writing can go very deep, I can be writing a scene and I'm sobbing. There's something about the immediacy and the visceralness of song that, at least for me, yeah, just touches me very deeply. And then, of course, there's also the way that it translates to an audience where there's a kind of a deep, immediate communing happening, I think, when things are going well, between a singer and her listeners. Yeah.
And your poem, The Vanishing, won the Lois Cranston Memorial Poetry Prize Award. Please share it with us.
Okay, yeah. The Vanishing. Yes, I know the world is blasting clear off its tracks, spilling its marbles, leaving us reeling like drunks before the hangover clamps down. Yes, I know things are bad and good people are worried. I know that some of us will disappear and won't come back. The giant ibis, for example, or the New Caledonian owlet nightjar, the Georgia aster, and a picky goldenrod that loves only certain mountains. Even the great lumbering mammals smiling from mascots and advertisements may fade into a red sunset. Yes, things are vanishing a mile a minute. But right now, I'm standing in a circle of humans, hip to hip, a hot river of music, playing so slow, so thick. We sway as one body, and the golden cage that balances in my chest has a door. It swings wide open, no guards, no whistles, no lock to pick, just a cloud of birds. White birds with no name. They keep coming, this blurred murmuration, these flowers with wings. Soft they settle about the room, watching as eyes closed, voices stilled. We feel our way over mountains of bones, along the edges of freak and whore and faggot, into a species of peace, an amnesty of the soul. And all this time they are watching, blinking, roosting close, ready to lift their wings, ready to knock at the walls for hours, days, years, ready to sing.
Beautiful. Beautiful. My guest is Marisa Handler. Marisa, please tell our listeners they can find more about your beautiful work and your creations.
Thank you. My website is probably the best place. It's marisahandler.com, and there are links there to my writing, my music, and my coaching. I work both one-on-one and with groups as a creative and life coach. So there's so much there that a brief tour will serve you. Yeah.
Absolutely. We'll be back with more of Marisa after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Marisa Handler. Marisa, tell us about your upcoming book, The Beautiful Unfolding.
So this book synthesizes really 2 decades of my experience in pursuing what I think of as my 2 vocations, the one being art through writing and song, and the other being awakening, healing and awakening, our transformation. And the deeper I've gone into both of those vocations, paths, the more I've seen how profoundly connected they are. And so this book looks at how essentially how our awakening journey is itself intrinsically creative. We are part of something that is unfolding through us and, of course, through everything. And it's profoundly creative. And the more we can come in contact with that source, the more we come into what is uniquely ours to do and give and be in this world.
Now, you share your method of 7 principles for creativity and also for creating the awakened life. Let's start with being radically open. You say that, like an artist facing the blank canvas, we should stay radically open, even to questioning our own ways of seeing. How do we radically open?
So this is very connected with what we were talking about earlier about the child, and keeping the child's eyes on the world. It's not always easy to stay radically open for very good reason. We have old ways of seeing that have perhaps were our survival at some point, old strategies, old protective strategies, and very likely no longer serve us and probably do us a disservice. So really the path towards radical openness is looking at what is preventing it and working using the best tools we have to transform those places. And when I sit down to write something, or you write a song or a poem or whatever, I may well have my idea about what it's going to look like, but there must be some degree of, hopefully a large degree of openness to whatever that mysterious force is that moves through us when we engage in something creative. You might call it the muse or God or source. And that's what I mean about staying radically. The more we can open, the more we allow that to move through us. And the more we give way actually to what is deepest in us, which is, of course, not separate from that.
And is that also a process of dropping our shields and being open?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to say, that this requires nuance too, because, there's situations where it's good to have a certain amount of shields. And we need our shields in certain ways. And then there are situations, and this is actually most of life, where we really don't, but we still kind of hang on to them. So here it's really about, again, doing whatever work needs to be done to let our deeper selves, our child selves, you might call it the inner child, see that actually it's safe now. It's safe now to drop the shield, to come out, to open, to see the world even in completely different ways maybe than we've seen it before. And that really is that is the spiritual path. It really is the scales dropping from our eyes.
The next principle is to use our practices intuitively. How may we do this?
So we live in an unprecedented era of access to an amazing array, really, of traditions, practices, tools, whether we're talking the work of Byron Katie in inquiry or, a meditation practice that's 2,600 years old, or somatic experiencing and various other trauma modalities or yoga. There's just so much out there. And we do need to master craft. Again, this is using the metaphor of an artist. Like, if I want to attain any level of skill or even virtuosity in an art form, I do need to learn craft. I do need to learn from masters. And we do need to do this. Otherwise, we kind of just become dilettantes, really. But so there needs to be some degree of commitment to some practice with some sort of oversight or teacher or guidance, because we cannot see ourselves clearly at the beginning. We really can't. But as we grow in practice, as we grow in our ability to see ourselves more clearly, You might say that the sort of oft cited 10,000 hours to mastery. I don't know how many hours exactly, but there's a certain point where we come into a place where we actually know ourselves well enough, and we know we're in touch sufficiently with our bodies and our intuition to trust our own internal GPS. Of course, we can always, on some level, trust our own internal GPS, but sometimes our internal GPS gets confused with fear or resistance. And once we get to know ourselves a little bit better, that's when we step off into what I call the blessed rebellion, where we actually, this is an important point where we say, okay, I've gotten so much out of this teaching, and there's something else that's calling to me. There's some element that I need to tend to. Maybe I've been sitting in silent practice for 10 years, and now I actually really want to bring a little more attention to movement and how movement can express what's moving through me, through the body, etc. And then we become our own teachers, really. Like, that's the journey. We learn from good teachers, and ultimately the movement is towards becoming our own best teachers.
And how do we use that intuition when selecting the teachers and the teachings?
It's a very good question. I think partly certainly initially, we just go with what calls us, and we don't necessarily know why, and we don't always need to know why. But there is some discernment that's required. I definitely, when I was younger, came into certain paths where there was something that was quite appealing or even seductive about it, but there was something that just felt off. And sometimes I wasn't always able to even articulate what that was. So really, I moved very intuitively in the direction of what felt right. And happily, that really served me. Notice what calls you and be curious about it. So I think that's the best way to go about it. Like, it might be with a certain teacher, there's a strong heart connection, right? And then just get curious. What's happening in the body? What's happening in the mind? What's drawing me? We want to get some sense of what's motivating us on a deeper level. It doesn't need to be very clear. It certainly doesn't need to be sort of psychoanalyzed, but just to have some sense of what's drawing us. Usually there'll be mixed motives. And then the other thing to say is, it may be that there's a certain teacher or teaching that serves you for a while, and then at a certain point, it just doesn't anymore. And this may, again, come through like just a moment of insight, or it might come through a body knowing, like there's something happening in the body. The body doesn't lie. The mind will tell us so many stories, but the body doesn't lie, so just noticing, something isn't sitting quite right here.
That's been one of my personal great lessons, to embrace the teaching if I resonated with it, and not deifying the teacher. That's a struggle for many, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Look, we take all our stuff and we project it onto, and what better figure to project our stuff from childhood onto than a spiritual teacher, right? Here it is, our father, our mother, God, whatever, all of it. Right. So we're going to put it on those people. It's not a question of if or whether, it happens. I've seen myself doing it over and over when I'm in this position of student, and I've seen students and clients do it to me. It's just what's going to happen. The real question is, can we have some good self-awareness around that? So we're conscious to some extent we're doing it, and we start to discern between what's real and what's our stuff.
For me, in a way, it was like looking for that loving parent.
I think that's what we do. That's what we do. And we go out and we find that. And then, of course, when that person doesn't match up to the ideal, it can feel like heartbreak. It can be shattering, devastating. We finally found someone who seems to live up to everything that we possibly hoped for, and it turns out that person's human.
And it's a sense of abandonment all over again.
Exactly. And that is important. So that's what I'm talking about when I say the things that block us, the things that come in our way, like the portals, the initiations, whether it's something as big as a dark night or some kind of experience of profound grief, abandonment, as you mentioned, or possibly jealousy this might manifest as, or rage. How dare she say that after me believing in her, or, et cetera, et cetera. That's that moment has tremendous potential for healing, because the stuff is old. It goes deep. And when we can come to it and see this and work it through, whether with that teacher or with a good therapist or mentor, or using just our excellent tools, there's going to be so much treasure hidden there.
Absolutely. You say that rather than doing and controlling, we shift the emphasis to being and receiving. How may we be open to receive?
Yeah. So in my group program, there's a whole module devoted to this. So we spend really 6 weeks, like, just how do we practice doing that? And a lot of it, because we live in a culture where it's so oriented around productivity and achieving and getting things done, and is it measurable what I'm doing? And when it comes to creative work, a lot of the time we put in, a lot of what we do, and it just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work in our schedule. I remember Alan Gurganis, one of my teachers, who wrote The Oldest Living Confederate Widow Tells All, fantastic writer, saying that for every page he published, he put in 100 pages of work, and that book is a tome, I think it's 700 pages long. So you can imagine the amount of labor that goes into it. In short, the deepest work that we do, whether this is creative work or spiritual work, it doesn't move in a linear way. It's not about productivity. We need to go deeper. And really, for a lot of us, that on a kind of ground level means we actually need to tend to the nervous system. If the nervous system isn't to some degree relaxed, it's going to be hard for the body to settle and for us to go deeper. So in my group program, we actually spend quite a bit of time learning how to receive, how to come into a place where we open the senses, where we slow down, and learn how to resource, basically, how to open to beauty, how to orient to the actual world that we're in, dropping out of the mind and into the body. A lot of it has to do with the nervous system and the body. And once we can come into a place of some degree of relaxation and ease and grounding, with that, we can begin to open to reality, which is pretty incredible, actually. If we really sit with the flower and pay deep attention to it, it just keeps opening. The deeper we look, it just keeps revealing the patterns, the colors, the textures. So we all have this potential to see deeply, to receive, but we have to get quiet enough. The system has to quiet enough where we can just be and come into a place of actual receiving.
And what about those who have worthiness challenges when it comes to receiving?
It starts with ourselves, right? So I think, ultimately, when we have these challenges, it's because we don't believe we really deserve it. And so it's doing the work again with good support, if possible, or, the work of Byron Katie, or a therapist, or there's so many good things out there right now to draw from. But coming into a place of unpacking what led us to the point of thinking we don't deserve this. Once we do that, seeing, like, the awareness that's not judgmental, it's I don't know, I think it's about 75% of the journey, really. Like, once we can see what's happening underneath there and hold it with some kindness, things can begin to unfold. And we can begin to open to deserving and receiving.
And perhaps the acknowledgement that the fact that we've made the effort to obtain the teaching, work with the teacher, that we are worthy. We've made the effort to get there. We're worthy to receive it.
We are all inherently worthy. We're so much more than worthy, actually. It makes me sad, because I've certainly dealt with a lot of this in my own life, and I just see it time and again. We are creatures of incredible power and beauty, and profound access really to just such light. We're so much more than worthy. And yes, at the same time, right, the sincerity with which we've engaged, the steps that we've taken, how far we have come. All of these, if we need proof, it's there.
Absolutely. My guest is Marisa Handler. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
If I could be you,
and you could be me, for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Marisa Handler. Marisa, we're talking about these 7 principles, and one of them that you're saying is you share that rather than seeing them as restricting, we engage creatively with our limits or edges, letting them lead us to new insights and ways of being. How may we do this?
So just as the artist does, when there's something about writing a sonnet, for example, a form like a sonnet or a villanelle, where it's a very, it's very prescribed. There's a certain way of doing it, and this many couplets and this, etc. This, this meter, etc. When we have those constraints, they actually inspire creativity. So it's kind of interesting. We think often, creativity is total freedom, but it's actually not. Because when there's a certain kind of a structure that's brought that is limiting, it pushes us to think in new ways. It pushes us, you could say, forgive the cliche, but it pushes us to think outside the box, to fit inside the box, interestingly. So it's the same with our own growth. We tend to view, we often, sometimes I think unconsciously equate our our experiences of transcendence, or our mystical experiences, our experiences of deep connection, that's real growth. That's the spiritual, that's the spiritual evolution happening there. And then there are these difficult places which we rather would not see, where the way I'm acting is very immature, or there's a certain pattern that I'm recycling that's decades old. And so we tend to either, we kind of want to bypass those places, or we get mired in them. We just get stuck. No, this is what's real. There's nothing else. That was just a nice delusion. All that spiritual stuff, right? Or like we bypass. We don't want to see it at all. But ultimately, these, when we open to them, much as a certain form does in any art, can inspire us creatively to find new ways of being and doing. So really, the things that we think of as our limitations, when held with the view, the mindset, seen through the eyes of an artist, as if we ourselves are the canvas, can inspire us to new insights, new openings, new ways of being.
Absolutely. You had touched upon this in the last segment. You say that obstacles do not block the path, they become the path. Please explain.
Yeah. So on a related note, my experience with the Dark Knight, I thought, oh my God, I had a whole trajectory laid out. After the Fulbright, I was going to try to get, I had a whole plan, basically. And my novel would be out in X many years, my all of this. And then that happened, and I was like, of course, on multiple levels, it was, challenging is understatement, but it became the path because I had no choice, right? And so what it opened me to ultimately was really my vocation as a healer, as a teacher of others. I was already pretty active on the creative front. And I was certainly doing my own spiritual work, but just the way that played out, I sort of had to come into a place of devoting much of my energy and time to healing and to unfolding, and then that became the gift I was able to give others. So we think we're in charge, and it's a lovely delusion to have sometimes, but we really aren't. But we do get to choose how we hold what happens to us, how we react to it.
It's interesting. When my path fully opened in my late 30s, early 40s, I found that these series of synchronicities started taking place, and synchronicity was defined by Carl Jung as meaningful coincidences without causal connection. Mm. And I found that when I opened to something, or something was presented to me, I had three choices. I could dismiss it out of hand. I could say, yes, that's interesting, but not for now, for later. Or I could say, yes, I need to approach that now. I need to embrace that now. And with every big yes, the next one came, and the next one came, and the next one came. Have you found that in your path?
Yes. And so that's what I think of as us really doing what I'm talking about in this book. We are being the artists of our own unfolding. We are co-creating with Source, you might say, or God, or however you want to call it, right? And that's how we know. These are like the lovely little, lovely little treats, or lovely little magical.
A gentleman by the name of Squire Rushnell called them God winks.
I love that. Yeah, I'm definitely flailing here at coming up with a good way to phrase it. But God winks, yeah, that's lovely. So right, so these are the little God winks, the indications. Hey, you're in creative flow. Not only are you in creative flow in terms of what you're actually doing, but you're in creative flow. You're dancing with life itself, as one of my clients likes to say. She talks about dancing with life. Yeah, and that's these God winks, as you call them, are life saying to us, hey, you're doing it. You're in it. You're open. And it's unfolding, and you're creating, and it's who knows where things are going to go. Watch out. We're on a ride here. Get ready.
And you share that we must stay attuned to our own knowing. How do we do that?
Yeah, I think a lot of that happens through the body, really. And so, there are a number of things I've already mentioned, sort of slowing down and pausing. But ultimately, what I'm saying here is really our path will be distinct. Ram Dass talked about this. Nisargadatta Maharaj talked about this in different ways, saying, you're going to have to walk your path alone. It's only because it's your path. So if we look, for example, at some contemporary examples of pretty awakened beings, let's say, like Adyashanti or Byron Katie or, I don't know, Eckhart Tolle, or, people that are actually on the contemporary landscape, they each of their form of awakening takes its own distinct shape, its own distinct message. They may be saying very similar things, or in the depths, the same thing even, their own distinct way of being. And that's true for all of us. Our own awakening path is going to be our distinct path. Nobody else can do it, right? Nobody else can see the world in the ways that we can see it, can give the world the distinct gifts we bring. And so it really is about staying attuned to our own way of being, because it can be very seductive to think, oh my God, like, look at what she's doing or what he's doing or what they're being in the world. That's what I should be doing. And of course, we go into comparison all the time. We get our spiritual superego gets online and tells us all kinds of things. But ultimately, where we truly want to go is into our own truth, and only we can know and express that. And so that's what I mean about staying, no matter how far we are on the journey, staying attuned deeply to our own sense of truth, really.
Absolutely. And you touched upon this before. Lastly, you share that we stay curious. What is the gift of curiosity?
Oh, so many gifts. But here's the paradox. The further we go on the spiritual path, the more we come into a sense of deeper knowing or understanding of reality, really. And it can be that we also get attached to those views, like, oh, right, I get it, emptiness or whatever, right? Oh, yeah, I get it, like, we're all one, right? But the journey just keeps unfolding. And A.H. Almas, Hamid Ali, the founder of the Diamond Approach, speaks about this beautifully in his book, Runaway Realization, where he talks about how it's a runaway journey. Realization just keeps unfolding new layers of itself. So we don't necessarily know what it's going to look like. So we don't want to get stuck at any one station, as he says, okay, right, it's non-dual. I got it. That's what it is. There's always going to be more to see and to experience. As he says, endless, ever subtler layers of delusion, which is true, mean endless, ever subtler layers of awakening. And so that's what I mean by staying curious. Even when we think we've got something, or we really get it in a deeper way than we have ever gotten it or seen it before, we still want to stay open and curious.
Absolutely. Tell us about your program, Live Your Creative Genius.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. So this is really a love child, I would say, between me and Source, or me and the creative current that runs through me in my teaching. And it's a 9-month in-depth creative coaching program designed to really help the participants to come into what is distinctly theirs to do and to give those gifts to the world, and that looks different for different participants. It may be writing the book that they've been planning to write for years. It may be simply stepping into their creativity. It may be putting out a certain, like building an NGO, actually. But typically it's like, the thing with coaching is we do the inner work and we do the outer work, right? So we're going into deep places, and then we're taking actual concrete steps in the world to make manifest our vision. And it's a real journey. We go, there's a whole chunk, as I said, on being and receiving. And then there's a module called Embracing the Shadow and Turning Obstacles into Allies, where we do exactly what I've been talking about here. We really go in deep into these shadow places to transform them so that they begin to lose their grip on us. And we move into our deepest creativity. We really do give our genius to the world.
My guest is Marisa Handler. Marisa, please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and your work in that program, Live Your Creative Genius.
Yep, at my website, marisahandler.com.
And that's spelled MarisaHandler.com. And what else can they find there?
There's songs, there's poetry, there's writing, lots to inspire you. And there's also, there's links to, music videos and interviews and just more information also about my coaching and teaching. Yeah.
Marisa, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your path and your wisdom.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you, Victor.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.